Hello, welcome to Cable's Conquests. I'm your host, Archie Cable, and we're here to talk about Marvel Crisis Protocol.
The name's Cable. Remember it.
Hello, welcome back to Cable's Conquests. As per usual, I'm your host, Archie Cable, and also as per usual, I'm joined by my co-host, Curtis Hodgson. Curtis, how are you doing? Happy New Year!
Happy New Year to you, Archie. I'm doing really, really well. Mostly that's because we've got something very, very exciting coming up next weekend that we're here to talk about, and I'm absolutely buzzing for it.
Yeah, I cannot wait. It's the second weekend of January, and we have our first event of the year, and it's a big one. It's the Mutant Weekender. So this is an event based in London, so kind of our local, or less local to me now, but localish area. There'll be a lot of familiar faces. And what is it? Is there 80-odd people attending?
Absolutely. Yeah, they don't get much bigger than this. 80 players attending for a 2-day event. Lots and lots of games. We've got 4 games on the first day, which will sort us into pods for day 2.
Mm-hmm.
And then on day 2, each bracket will contain 8 players, depending on how well they finished in day 1. They will fight it out over 3 games to determine the winner of that pod. And the anticipation for it has been huge, obviously, in the local meta.
Yeah.
We're both part of that London local meta. Obviously, you've moved away, but still very much part of that meta. Everyone's now getting really, really excited about it.
So this is a really cool event because on day 1, you can have this terrible day. You go 0-4, but then on day 2, you come back fresh. You're put in a pod with people who have had similar results to you on day 1. I think there are 10 different pods.
Yep, that's correct.
And so there's silverware to be had in each pod. So even if you're in the 10th pod, if you win that pod, you win a trophy and you win some prizes. So there are a ton of prizes to be had. There's loads to play for, and I really like the setup.
Yeah, and Dr. Norbert, as people will know him, has been spoiling weekly over the last couple of weeks a lot of the prizes that are available on offer, and those prizes are available from the top pod, the Omega pod, right the way down to the 10th pod as well. So much up for grabs. I'm super excited. I can't tell you the amount of times I've gone to an event and I feel like, I just want one more game to prove my mettle. I think this my roster just wants one more to test it, one more to go the extra mile. Maybe you go 1-3 and you feel like you're unlucky in some of those, or you go 3-1, and this event allows you to do that, and it puts you in that pod with similarly rated players. So you get games that are going to be fun because they're at your level, whether that's at the top end of the competitive spectrum, or if it's at the the bottom, more fun side.
Yeah.
And even more fun is for day 2, you're allowed to make changes to your roster. So
yeah, of course,
it's a bit of a wacky situation. You think, right, well, if I know the players that I'm coming up against, I'm going to make all the changes so I can list tailor, roster tailor for those players. They can make changes too. So it's a little bit of game theory over, are they gonna twist? Are they gonna stay with the same thing? What are they gonna do? Am I gonna do the same? Or you could just completely ignore the 7 other players that are gonna be in your pod and be like, you know what? Iron Fist was garbage for me all day 1, and I've not forgiven him. So he's going in the bin, and we're bringing out the Punisher, or whoever.
Yeah.
And it just gives you the opportunity to do that.
Yeah. Or you could completely change. You could completely change affiliation. You could go from playing Avengers to Cabal if you wanted to. Like, it's a really cool element, which I kind of hadn't appreciated when I first signed up. But the more that people are talking about it, the more interesting I think it is.
Absolutely.
I guess there's these 7 games across 2 days, but it's a bit more than that. There's going to be Friday night kind of games being had. I will be there. Well, we will both be there on the Friday night. There'll be some activities on the Saturday night. I think there's a quiz. So there's going to be a lot happening. And most importantly, Curtis, this is the first time we'll have seen each other in real life for about 6 months.
I know.
So it'll be great to actually hang out with people that we haven't seen in ages.
I'm worried you're not going to recognise me. It's been so long. You'll only be able to recognise me by my voice rather than by what I look like. You'll have forgotten. Yeah, it's been some time. A lot has happened in that time, but it should be so great to, like you say, turn up on the Friday, maybe get a couple of casual games in with people, have a couple of drinks.
Yeah.
I live in London, but I've still booked myself a hotel, so I can really
Yeah.
get that whole weekend event atmosphere. I'm not rushing home. It's local as well, so I can stumble back after a couple of pints on the Friday and the Saturday night and be back hopefully fresh the next day.
Yeah, the hotel we're staying in is about a stone's throw away from the venue, so it should be.
Yeah, it's going to be a cracker, and I'm really really looking forward to it. But Archie, it's more than just gaming, right? That's going on, gaming and the socialing.
Hmm.
The Mutant Weekender is celebrating the hobby side of the game as well.
Yes.
And we've got a couple of things planned for that, haven't we? Obviously, you've had a bit of experience winning top prizes for your hobby. Tell us, what are you doing this time round?
So we at Cables Conquest love the hobby side, and we want to bring a bit more of that into kind of the forefront of MCP. And so what we've both decided to do, kind of actually separately, we decided, then we came together and made this a Cables Conquest thing. We've decided to make some epic display boards for our rosters. So I'll spoil my roster now, because I think if you've listened to the last episode, you probably know what I'm going to play. But I'm going to be playing Midnight Suns.
Excellent.
So what I've done is, part of the reason I did this was I saw the Tomb of Dracula, the new terrain piece that came out with the monsters box, and loved the look of the thing. But I thought, it's not that good a terrain piece to actually play the game. So I thought, okay, well, let's do something special with it. So I've built a display board based around this tomb. So I've got kind of the tomb on one side with models positioned on it, and then kind of going across out of the tomb is going to be a graveyard. So, well, I say gonna be, it's almost built because we're about a week out from the event. It's almost finished. But yeah, so it's kind of half graveyard, half this kind of sculpted AMG official model of the tomb. And I think it looks awesome, and I'm really pleased with it. I'm really excited to show it off with all my models on it. I've rebased a bunch of my Midnight Suns to fit with it as well, so I'm really leaning into it.
It's not just you as well. It does look awesome. You've been sharing the work in progress pics with myself and Louis, who does a lot of the behind the scenes stuff on the podcast, and it really does look fantastic. Some of the effects that you've done, I don't want to spoil them too much. People want to see this in the flesh when they turn up at the event, because it's the little details you've done are so effective. It really really works so well with that Dracula terrain piece as the centerpiece, but obviously it's elevated by the graveyard that surrounds it. And then once your models are on it, once your roster's on it, which we'll get into shortly, it really really comes alive. And I can't wait to see it in the flesh. It's some of your best work. I'm not gonna lie. I think
Thank you.
it certainly is some of your best work.
It's been a bit of an amalgamation of lots of years of kind of trying different things, and it's kind of come all together on this one display board. I should also shout out last year's Mutant Weekender. The first one, we did a couple of episodes on that. There were a couple of really cool kind of hobby pieces, especially from the Belgian contingent that came over.
Yep.
I think it's Steve who made the Circus of Dormammu, and he made Dormammu as the kind of circus leader and all of his affiliated models in his roster performing various tricks. And that was amazing. That was really inspiring to me to actually come back to the Weekender and do something bigger and better and try and kind of gun for that kind of hobby prize and just celebrate the fact that there's so many aspects to this hobby outside of the game as well.
Definitely. So you and me, we come from Middle Earth strategy battle game. That's how we met.
Mm-hmm.
And the culture in Middle Earth strategy battle game is that you turn up to an event, your models are always painted, at least to a minimum standard. There's a big culture in Middle Earth strategy battle game where people do display boards and really, really go into the hobby. They love the theme and stuff. And coming across to MCP, at first I was a little bit sort of saddened that didn't seem as prevalent. You turn up to lots of events, and while it's great for accessibility, there's rarely rules that sort of require models to be painted. There doesn't seem to be as many sort of painting competitions or events that are encouraging the hobby side. Yet there are so many great hobbyists in MCP. We met a lot of them at the Mutant Weekender last year. You see so many of them on social media, and with the amazing sculpts that exist in this game, plus the terrain pieces that AMG brings out, just by nature of how you build up a table and design a terrain board, you saw them firsthand at the WTC. There is so much scope for creativity in this game, and it's so great that the Mutant Weekender is celebrating it. And we've gone full hog this year, and hopefully it'll look good.
Absolutely. So I've got a display board. What about you? What are you bringing to the hobby?
Yes, like you, I was inspired by the amazing work that we saw in the last Mutant Weekender. And for me, this was my first big event since the birth of my daughter. It's a few months since I've done events and stuff. So I really, really wanted to come into this one with a bang. So again, we sort of had separately had these inspirations and came together. But I've been really, over the last couple of months, really trying to make Charles Xavier, Professor X, X-Men work. I've really, really enjoyed playing with them and tinkering with them. And I thought, right, what better place to try and showcase them at a 7-game event? And what better way to showcase them than in front of the school itself? So the plan is, and it's slowly coming together. In fact, it's only just started being painted. We do have about 8 days, 7 or 8 days before the event. I'm hoping it gets painted in time. I've built Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. And essentially, it's a sort of a medium-sized display board with that famous, iconic entrance to the school as a bit of a backdrop, with sort of the lawns and a driveway out in front. It's all been built out of XPS foam. Apart from there's a few bits, there's a contact that we've got through Jamie, one of the event organisers, who does 3D printing, has sorted me out with some windows. But not just windows, he's specifically designed for me the sign that you see in the first X-Men film. It's pretty much an exact replica of the sign. I think it's as you see a car drive, through the leaves, and it pans to the sign that says Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters. So he's printed me off some of those. I got him to print me off loads of extras as well, because I want to be handing them out to my opponents at the event too. So
Nice.
that's on the board. And the idea is that my roster will be there in front of the school. But like I say, it's a fair lick of paint away from being completed at this stage. So fingers crossed it'll get done.
I mean, it looks awesome, and I'm sure I back you to get it done in time. And actually, I have to say, I'm very impressed. I've not got any commitments, so I've been able to spend hours working on my board, whereas as you said, you've got a wee baby girl to look after, so you've had moments of hobby time rather than large swathes. So the fact that you've put something like this together is pretty impressive. So I'm really looking forward to seeing it finished and check it out at the Weekender. It will be, both our boards will be there in the flesh. That is something that I'm still working on, is how exactly to transport it, but
how to get it there.
Yeah,
I've committed to driving, even though again I live in London. I should be getting on the tube, but there's no way I'm taking this display board on the tube. So yeah, good luck you getting it on the train up from Southampton.
Yeah. The other thing we should mention is, as we've decided to make this kind of a Cables Conquests endeavour, we're having our first foray into the world of YouTube videos. So Louis, our behind-the-scenes man, has been very good at updating our YouTube channel with the podcasts, but for these 2 display boards, we're going to put out videos of kind of the process of us making it. Mine will be a bit more kind of detailed towards kind of the actual how I've built it, whereas your video will be a little bit more of a vlog talking about your kind of journey and the kind of decision making points that you've had to make. So hopefully 2 different styles of video, but both showing off our wares. And if you want to see how we've actually built this, check that out when it's out. We're not sure when it's going to happen yet, but sometime after the Weekender.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that was all part of the inspiration, wasn't it? To try and maybe for me, it was to put together a bit of a vlog of the journey to the Mutant Weekender, and for yourself, sort of a bit of a how-to on how you've built it. So yeah, excited to see those go up on the YouTube, something a little bit different to the usual podcast, as the listeners will be realizing that sort of Mutant Weekend, a big special event for us, everything is going to be sort of slightly different and trialing new things. So I will say it again at the end, but if you like any of these changes or a different way of doing this content, do let us know. Or if it's absolutely terrible, you want us to go back to our usual format, then we probably will be going back to our usual format for future events. But also any feedback is really welcome on that.
Yeah. So this is really like a prelude to the Weekender. So like we say, the Weekender is next weekend. But what we're going to do is, because it's the first time in a long time we've both been at the same event, we're going to do 2 roster building sections, one for my list and one for Curtis's list. And that will be today's episode. And then in a future, probably 2 episodes, we will cover the actual Weekender. So what we're telling you now is what we think about our roster before the event, and then in future episodes you'll hear about our rosters and how we feel about them after the event. So without further ado, we've talked a lot about kind of the hobby side. Shall we go into roster building and talk about the gaming side?
You're boring me. If you want to help me nail him, get your team together and let's get started.
So, Archie, the big weekend is upon us. Who are you bringing to the Mutant Weekender?
So, as I've already spoiled, I'm going to be bringing Midnight Suns. We had our previous episode was a practice event, and it went well. So, I haven't made a huge amount of changes.
Do you want to just remind us who's in the roster?
So, my characters are Werewolf by Night, Ghost Rider, Blade, Dr. Voodoo, Iron Fist, Encantu the Living Mummy, Black Panther Chosen of Bast, Wong, Hela, Queen of Hell, and Craven the Hunter. My team tactics cards are Siege of Darkness, Bats the Ghost Hound, Heroes for Hire, Service to Anubis, Highway to Hell, Deal with the Devil, Survival, Instant Recovery, Sacrifice and Brace. And then my crises are for Secures, Cosmic Invasion, Infinity Formula, and Deadly Meteors, and extracts are Cubes, Fear Grips, so Hammers, and Skrulls.
Right, okay. So it's practically the same
Practically the same.
as the event-winning roster from the previous episode. So that's good. So we won't go too much into detail over sort of the basics. I do have an immediate question, though.
I think I know what your immediate question is going to be.
What on earth is Craven still doing there?
I've really ummed and ahed about this a lot, and I think I said at the end of the last episode that the likelihood is that the Immortal Hulk would come into this roster. Now, I think he's good, and he's very good in Midnight Suns because his maneuverability just goes up a notch with the bump, and he's affiliated. However, I played a game with him where I was controlled really effectively, but he was still able to get his attacks off that he needed to, so he was able to bump and do his place. But then his attacks didn't do much, and so he ended up being this 7-threat lump that didn't actually offer much, and I think it really put me off. And I think that was probably a bad dice day.
Yep.
For Immortal Hulk. I do appreciate that, but I think my problem is I've also got scar tissue from the previous Mutant Weekender where Immortal Hulk came along and he did similar things, and I think my playstyle personally is that I don't like these big kaiju characters that rely on rolling good dice. They roll big pools of dice, but they rely on good dice to actually get their threats worth, and I prefer the small characters running around, maybe punching above their weight, maybe whiffing, but actually I wanted to stick with my kind of core values as an MCP player.
So he stayed at home, right? Okay.
So he has stayed at home.
I think it makes a lot of sense. You don't have any dice manipulation that's offensive in the roster. So those large dice pools are great, but when they whiff, and that's 7 threat that's whiffing. Whereas I think when you're leaning into a higher volume of attacks that you do with the likes of Siege of Darkness, or by having trying to go wider with more and more attacks, it reduces the chance. It doesn't matter that one attack whiffs because it's a 3 threat that's whiffed, but also the chances of every one of them whiffing is much lower, and if you feel like the floor is much higher, while yes the ceiling might be slightly lower, but it's still high enough that you get a good game out of it. So I can understand that.
However, I haven't addressed your actual question.
Yeah, what is Craven still doing?
Why is Craven there? Now, I think I spoke a lot about Craven at the start of last episode, and all I said there stands. However, I then ended up not playing him at the event. What I think Craven is there for is, so if you look at my crises, I like going wide. I've got a D map and a B map, and then the I map, which is less relevant for Craven. But I quite like with Midnight Suns the wide map. And so I was thinking, what rosters also like wide maps? And there's Hellfire Club and there's Webs, who are 2 of the best lists, especially for control. And I actually think Craven has some really good play into both of them. And the reason is because he essentially, with the bump and all his triggers, he can do a huge amount of movement. He can basically move twice while still making 2 good attacks. He can also add extra dice to attack rolls, so it means that something like a Blade facing who's already quite good against something like Webs has suddenly a 6 dice Mystic builder into, say, Miles, and suddenly Miles is not quite as tanky and annoying as he normally is. But I think the secret sauce with Craven is that he's got this tracker that he can put on someone so that whenever they move, they suffer a damage. And we know someone in particular who's prevalent across a lot of the top teams, and that is Toad. Toad loves to run away and then double move. And if I'm putting a tracker on him, that means every time he moves, he suffers a damage and he loses Wallcrawler. So that's another kind of benefit. Then that means that he's potentially taking up to 3 points of damage, which suddenly means he's not quite as tanky for a 2-threat as previously would be.
It means on his injured side, he just can't move that many times because he would kill himself.
Yeah.
It means that if you do get an attack off on him, you do 2 damage, he gains enough power to then slippery away. Suddenly, that 2 damage, if he does slippery away, puts him on 3 damage, and he's looking incredibly more vulnerable. Or, if you've already got some damage on him because of him moving around, he suddenly can't slippery away because he might kill himself.
Exactly. So I really like Craven, and I wanted to bring Craven. That was what my heart was telling me.
Right.
And so I think I've now, which is different to the previous episode where I just threw him in because I think his kit works really well with Midnight Suns. I think I've got a bit more of a place for him so that I know when I'm going to bring him along. He's not an every game piece, but there are specific situations where I think he is worth bringing along.
He's your anti-Toad.
Part of the reason I've got Cosmic Invasion in there, which is 16 threat, which I think is a little low for a lot of Midnight Suns, is because he helps me go 5 wide at 16 threat while still having a good D-map team.
Nice.
Someone like Encanto is not as good on D-maps because he doesn't have the action compression, whereas you could bring Craven in for him instead and still go 5 wide, and I think that is quite effective with Midnight Suns and their above average attack dice.
Do you still get a 5 threat in at 16?
No, that is the thing that you do lose.
Because, of course, we talked on the last episode that your roster building, when you're choosing a team, is very much based around these 5 threats.
Yes.
12 by Night and Ghost Rider still taking sort of pride of place in this team.
Yes, absolutely.
Is that still the thinking?
Absolutely. It is still the thinking. I really like both 5 threats, and I think I've played enough games now where I know which one fits in what kind of game plan. I think both of them can also pivot to different game plans, which I think is really useful. So I like that kind of mid-range 17-18. I can go up to 19-20. I can come down to 16-15. But yeah, really that mid-range is where the 5 threats are at their peak. So that's what I kind of want to focus around. And so you can see that most of my crises are those mid-range threat values. I did have before, one of the few changes I've made, I'll jump to crises just quickly because we're on it, is that Spider Portals was there and has now been dropped. And I don't dislike it for Midnight Suns, especially the build that I've done. But I was thinking to myself, what happens if I come up against X-Men and X-Men bring something like Senators? Then I think I lose that most of the time. And I know that X-Men are pretty popular.
Yep.
Especially kind of the Storm X-Men.
I think a Storm X-Men on Senators, Spider Portals would be, I mean, that's X-Men's dream, that. 11,
Exactly.
10 points on the table. They can duck and dodge. They can flip most of those secures and pick up the Senators as well. Yeah, they are enjoying that. And they've got they can choose characters with great energy defense to flip them.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe perhaps some of your characters are they sort of top out at 3 energy.
Yeah. So, yes, if we go 16, it means I'm not taking my big bad 5s, but I think the roster still functions pretty well, and with going 5 wide, and Craven really helps that on those wide maps.
It does surprise me a little bit because, reflecting on your tournament win, Portals was, one of the games that you played, and, you talked about Wong's ability to move, bump, flip. His ability to give himself power early, keep that 2 power on him so he can do that. I suppose going for a non-pay to flip D map means he just needs to move, bump, and then maybe you use his power for healing or other stuff. But it was a little niche that I quite liked with Wong that you brought, which it seems no longer present.
Yeah, I think Wong still offers that because he basically just moves between the D map. I think I'd be very happy with Spider Portals in here. I think that would be fine. I think I was just aware that I've played X-Men quite a lot. I imagine we'll see quite a few at the Weekender, and I felt that was actually a weakness that's not worth bringing along. I think actually generally with this roster, I'm not too worried about any crisis coming up, but I think that maxing out an X-Men favorite is probably not a wise move.
Yes, yeah. You can guarantee, there'll be X-Men players there. Whether X-Men was top of the competitive list or at the bottom, there's going to be X-Men players there. So
Yeah,
not bad
exactly.
thinking about. On sort of thinking about sort of the meta, do you have any expectations
Mhm.
for the meta? Things that you'll see on the top tables, or things that you might come across in those early games that people will be playing that you've thought about or teched against, or there's pieces in this roster. What do you expect the meta to look like?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because there's been a lot of new models that have come out recently. The monsters being one set of them. But actually, I'm not sure how much that has changed the meta. So when I was most up to date with the meta was WTC, and I'm not sure how much it's changed since. So there's kind of the two ends of the spectrum. There's those like heavy lean into the secures and extracts, which are the likes of Web Warriors and Hellfire Club, which I think we'll still see quite a lot of at the event. And I've told you a little bit how I'm teching against that. The other end of the spectrum is your Cabals and your Asgards, who are both these big, beefy, punch-through lists. And this was where a lot of my umming and ahhing about Immortal Hulk came into it. I'm like, do I bring him because he is pretty good against these lists because he's immortal,
Yeah.
essentially, and he can punch through these bigger health pools. But actually, I think this roster, Ghost Rider can do that as well. One of my games at the last event, that crit manipulation, the crit thing that Ghost Rider does is really good against models that roll big dice pools. So let's take an example of the classic Cabal with Red Skull, Thanos, and Baron Zemo. Baron Zemo charges in, punches one of my small characters, probably dazes them. But in the process, he's been death decreed, for example. He's rolling 7 dice. He's changing a skull to a crit. The likelihood is he's rolling a few crits in there. And if he's taken a little bit of damage already, or even if he's not and he gets really lucky and rolls 5 crits, suddenly I'm like, Ghost Rider kills
Pop.
him.
And it doesn't cost you any more power for the extra crits that he rolls, right?
Exactly.
You just pay the superpower once, and then it's his good luck turns into his bad luck.
Yeah, so I think Ghost Rider is really good. The other character that's really good is Iron Fist, because Iron Fist can activate these big, scary models. Yep. And I think that is really, really good. I've played a few games with Iron Fist, both at that last event and since. He shone every time, because if you don't take him off the board, he'll activate you. He's good at power generation. But if you attack Iron Fist, then Ghost Rider's going to pop you with his crit manipulation. So that was kind of my thinking, was that I don't actually need Immortal Hulk. I actually think that I can do better, or I can be more comfortable with the roster that I've got based on those two characters in particular.
And I think with Heroes for Hire means that if someone decides, as I would if I was coming across that, right, I want to take Ghost Rider off the table, Heroes for Hire can just sort of set that chain up, because Iron Fist takes the hit. Maybe he survives it because he's counting blanks and stuff, and then throws that character away, or he dazes and he wakes up next turn with loads of power to activate your big kaiju.
Yeah, the sneaky thing with Iron Fist is he can survival and he can still Heroes for Hire.
Oof. So he can take the hit and not take any damage.
Yeah. So there's actually quite a lot of way. I've got Sacrifice in there, which is your classic protect Ghost Rider. I've got Deal with the Devil, which means that even if you kill Ghost Rider, I'll just be like, all right, Wong, you can.
Because Wong's in every game piece, as we learned in the last.
Yeah. So I think actually, the more I thought about this roster, the more tech I feel I have to choose who my characters will get beaten up. That's fine. But I can choose which characters are getting beaten up more than a lot of rosters. Yeah. And so that's kind of the thinking. Whether that will actually come to fruition, we'll see, because I haven't played against like Cabal and Asgard with this roster, but that's the idea. I'm also not sure how many of those there will be, because I don't know if it's just the communication lines that I've seen, but it's gone a little bit more quiet on that front. I think both of those lists have been played and everyone knows what they do, and so people might be moving on to pastures new and maybe not bringing them. We'll see.
I thought that as well. I thought maybe the community was self-policing itself and not bringing, that gross Asgard. Is it that 15 of Hero of Midgard, Bill and Loki?
Yeah.
Or they wouldn't bring the Thanos Cabal. And then WTC happened, and that Thanos Cabal was in just winning games left, right, and center in everyone's team. Maybe because it was a team format and they felt they needed it there. Would individuals turn up to an event and play it? You talk to people who have played it, and you say, "Oh, do you enjoy playing it?" So many of them don't.
Yeah.
But if push came to shove, they want to win an event. So it's certainly one as big as a Mutant Weekender. So yeah, I'm similar to you. I'm unsure of whether we'll see a lot of it, but it's still very powerful.
Yeah. I think it's obviously important to think about roster, like big, scary meta rosters when you're building your roster. But I think ultimately the key is you've got 7 games with these characters. Like, do you actually enjoy playing with them? That's the most important thing to me. I'd love to win this event. Like, that would be amazing. But actually, I'd want to have fun with my characters. That was the final straw of what forced me, or what made me choose this particular roster.
Great.
It helped that I had some success with it as well. But that kind of was my logic there.
Fantastic. Were there any other changes that you'd made coming into this event, or is it just a secure one? I've noticed, was Scrolls there last time?
Scrolls is new.
I thought that was, because I thought all your extracts were 17 and 18, but that's a 20 threat.
Yeah, so Scrolls is new. It was Montesi.
Right.
But I think Montesi's similarly okay. And I think I could have gone for another like 3 extracts. But I think I actually quite like the Scrolls being almost like a mini D map. You know, it's that kind of wide and then 2 in the middle. And with the bump, I think the push from the Scrolls is slightly less problematic for me.
Sure.
I have characters as well in there, like Iron Fist, who can grab the middle, get pushed, and then bump away. I have Hela, who, as we talked about last time, is my safe grab, where she can move, bump, and even if she gets pushed, she gets a medium move after that. Yep. So I think actually the Scrolls pushing me is less problematic. And for example, someone like Werewolf by Night, if he picks up a Skrull and then you push him, if you push him towards you, then he's just going to be happy. Yeah. But if you push him away, he's actually still very efficient at getting back because he's got so much maneuverability.
Yeah. But you're not too worried about the push. Looking at these characters, a lot of them have good physical defense.
Yeah.
A lot of them are rolling 4 physical dice. And those that don't, the likes of Ghost Rider, Iron Fist, they're the ones who are probably more likely to have that additional power when they pick up a Skrull. Ghost Rider, because you might go on with him later and someone else has taken some damage, so he's got extra power. And Iron Fist, like you say, he's gaining 2 power in the power phase, so he can move back. Yeah. And if they don't get pushed, these characters can pick up. There's 2 Skrulls on the midline. If you pick that up, range 1, then you bump back range 1. It's almost like the equivalent of picking something up at range 2. So it's exactly. Everyone becomes Toad, which is quite nice.
Yeah, and also I think I like people being pushed.
Yes.
Because it makes my kind of attacks go off earlier. I think because of the action compression of a lot of my characters can kind of attack and move in one go, it's not as problematic that say I push you towards me and I make one attack, I'm often not then stuck on my back line. I'm not stuck in my deployment zone. I can often make an attack and still get to somewhere relevant.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of was the logic with Skrulls.
Excellent.
And I think also it's a slightly faster scoring, which is probably better. It's not really fast, but it's not. Basically, I was thinking if we draw something like Gamma Wave, I don't really want a Montesi as well. Right. I want something that's a little bit faster. So it's actually kind of similar to Cosmic Invasion. It was more like a choice based on what happens if I draw one of these big, scary teams that just want to score slowly. This at least gives an extra way of scoring VPs.
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And if I'm going to be honest, Skrulls is one of my favourite crises going. Yeah. So, if I came up against you, I'd be very happy to go with your extracts on the off chance we could get Skrulls, because I find it just quite fun to play.
Yeah.
20 threat might be one of the biggest reasons why it's great.
20 is fun, and I think, like I said, I think 20 is still pretty good for me. I can still go up there happily. Yeah. Maybe get 2 5 threats.
2 5s in at 5
really
wide.
Start going ham.
Definitely. Yeah, well, because your 2 5s, Wong and Blade, still leaves you with 4 threat.
Yep.
So.
Or I can drop Wong, although God forbid I drop Wong.
Yeah, come on. Don't be realistic.
Yeah. Grow up.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, so I've got one final question before we end there. Yep. We haven't gone into tons of depth, about the principles behind the roster. If people do want to hear about that, do check out our last episode, because Archie proved that he's found the winning formula in this roster with a fantastic event result. But I do have one final question. We talked earlier in the podcast about the fact that you can change your roster come day 2. Sounds like you keep telling me this roster is going to get 7 games, so you want to have fun with them. But do you have any characters sort of in reserve who could come in day 2 because maybe you get into that top pod and you're like, oh god, Pat's brought Apocalypse and I want this person, or Connor's got webs and I need something that's going to go toe to toe with that. Obviously, assuming they're in the top pod, they might not be.
Yeah.
Or you're in the bottom pod and you're like, screw this, I'm just gonna have some fun. Is there anyone sat in reserve?
So we've already talked a lot about Immortal Hulk. I might bring Immortal Hulk along in my case, just so that if I've played 4 big scary teams and my Ghost Rider plan hasn't worked, and I see that there's a bunch in whatever pod I'm in, I'll be like, okay, let's just pivot to Immortal Hulk and let's give him a run out again. Let's give him a chance to prove his worth. The other character I'm thinking about, newer character that I haven't played a huge amount, is Dracula. He's a cool model, like he's cool. I've painted him up. I think he's reasonably good in Midnight Suns because the bump really helps his action economy. But also, he's coming with me anyway because he's part of the display board. Because the Midnight Suns are invading Dracula's tomb, so he's got to be there. So he's coming anyway, so maybe he'll hit the table.
Nice.
And in similar vein, I really love the model I've got for Moon Knight. And so maybe if I want a bit of fun, I might bring Moon Knight along. He's a Midnight Sun. Yeah. I think he's pretty good. He just doesn't quite get in ahead of the other 3s that I've talked about, basically because of my game plan.
Yeah.
So maybe he'll come along as well.
I think he's got a great spender that works with your game plan because of sort of the place on it. If you've got the power at the start of the turn, you can do that place and then maybe move away or move on to a point or whatever. I think does it push them as well or throw them? So
yes, push and place.
Push and place.
Really
so that seems to work your game plan, but so often I don't see Moon Knight getting that spender off.
Yeah, there are just so many good 3s now, and there are so many good 3s in Midnight Suns that play a specific role. I really wanted to bring Moon Knight, but I just couldn't justify him over my other 3s.
That makes sense.
I could have brought Moon Knight over Kraven, but as I've talked about, I like Kraven. And
yeah.
I like also that no one else plays Kraven. So that's another reason to bring him along.
You're the only person I've seen play him. And there are lots of Spider-Foes players out there. But even they're not bringing Kraven. You bring him, though. Even when you play Spider-Foes, you love him. He does work for you.
Yeah. It's a bit of a meme.
Excellent. Great talking about the roster.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic.
Let's pause there and move on to talking about your roster, because I'm excited to get into some Charles.
Excellent. Let's do that.
To me, my X-Men.
We've had a deep dive into my Midnight Suns roster, and it's now time to turn our focus to the second half of Cable's Conquest that will be attending the weekend. Curtis, what is your roster?
So, as I've alluded to with my display board, I will be bringing along X-Men. Let me go through the roster, and you can see what I'm trying to do. So, starting off, we've got Professor X, Storm, Nightcrawler, Rogue, Beast, Cable, Juggernaut, Quicksilver, Psylocke, and Okoye. And then my team tactic cards are Children of the Atom, Brace for Impact, Sacrifice, Recalibration Matrix, Do You Know Who I Am, First Class, To Me My X-Men, Xavier's Dream, Mind Wipe, and Can I Borrow That? And then my crises, starting with my secures, we've got Mutant Madmen, Spider Portals, Sword Base, and then my extracts are Paranoia Pummels Populous, Senators, and Skrulls.
Nice.
As you can see, it is X-Men, and what I'm really trying to lean into here is Professor X is X-Men. So for those who are unfamiliar, and you should be by now, because I think I've yabbered on about it enough, his leadership is where when a character spends power on a superpower, another character may gain a power. So for me, it's all about building synergies where you can create a chain of events, all because someone does something with a superpower that then enables someone else to do something with the power that they've gained. They do a superpower themselves. That's you're recycling that power through the team to try and improve your efficiency. But you'll have also noticed Storm in there. Storm is there, and we can come on to why she's there. But she is an option if I wanted to go for a Storm-led X-Men. But also, she's actually really great under Professor X, I've learned. I wasn't playing her at first, but the fact that it costs 2 power now to do her Eye of the Storm, where she gets to add dice to her next attack, that's great, and it often refunds itself, but it's triggering the leadership. She's got a throw, she's handing out shock, and she can stay alive because she's got Goddess of Storms, which is
Yeah.
practically stealth. But all those characters that ignore stealth don't ignore Goddess of Storms.
Yeah.
So that's quite nice. It's caught out a few Daredevil players for sure.
Yeah, so we have done an episode on Charles before, but it was a while ago, and also it was a Charles-Sam hybrid.
Yes.
So this is pure Charles, and this is the first time we're talking in detail about the roster. And I know that you've been working on this roster and tinkering with characters for months. So let's focus on Charles. What is your core with Charles?
Yep. So my core with Charles is, of course, him and Nightcrawler, and then usually one of my 5s, depending on the type of game I want to play. So you mentioned that I previously played Charles and Captain America Sam Wilson, and that Captain America Sam Wilson pivot was largely when I wanted to play a more extract focused game or more objective focused game. I could pivot into wider Avengers, because Professor X, he's quite maneuverable himself, but he offers a reroll bubble. So largely you want those characters within that bubble to benefit from it. So it immediately makes you think he needs to be on more narrow secures, or where there's fighting, or where you want your characters near each other. So Sam previously was there for when you wanted to go a bit more spread out, a bit more wider. After that event, I was like, right, I played Sam too much. That's a crutch that I need to bin off. How can we make Professor X work? And I think he can play both those gameplays. And in fact, actually, what I've learned over my practice is that he still probably plays the objective games slightly better than he plays the attrition game. But it depends on which of those 5 threats you bring. So I mentioned that core was Professor X, Nightcrawler, and one of the 5s. Nightcrawler is almost an every game piece because he does both of those gameplays really, really well. He can chase an extract because his maneuverability is excellent with his places off his attacks. He can take out big characters to steal their extracts if he just keeps getting his spender off, his Brimstone Blitz. Likewise, he can go and pick up an extract. He can get stealth when he's near terrain to try and keep himself safe. He can add defense dice, and when Professor X is hanging around and giving him rerolls, suddenly he can become quite tanky. But more importantly, he gets the Professor X train rolling turn 1. He has a superpower called Bamf, which costs X, and you can spend between 1 and 3 power, and he can place, depending on how much power you spend, within that distance of himself. That means my first move, often in a game, is to go up to the midline, pick up an extract with first class, so I'm not spending any power on that extract, and then with the 1 power that he does have, place back. Often try to place back 1, so he's then within range 1 of a terrain piece to try and keep himself that little bit safer, keep the invisible in shadows.
It's quite like what I've just spoken about with Iron Fist in Midnight Suns, where he can double move and bump back. It's the same thing, but
Absolutely.
Nightcrawler also gets that Professor X power train rolling, which is really good. We've played a few games, and Nightcrawler is so often the star because it's not only his early gameplay, but his spender can win you games, can't he?
It really, really can. And he's such a friend of Professor X because he can do superpowers in his own turn and superpowers in your opponent's turn with the, I'm going to butcher this, Unglaublich Acrobats, which allows him to add dice when he gets attacked. If he's got an extract on him, he is inviting people to attack him. So he's often getting that superpower off, sending power around the team. But as you just alluded to there, his spender, which can be quite game winning, the Charles leadership can enable you in those later turns, as you're doing superpowers, as the game sort of goes on, you can just sort of keep loading Nightcrawler up with power each turn. And if he's got enough power, he can place with his superpower. He can then place off his first attack. And then if he's getting that trigger, which is a crit and hit, the trigger is, after the attack is resolved, this character may make an additional attack action. If he's got the power, he then just does it again, and it adds a dice for every time you've been placed that round. So quite often, the first time you do this attack, you might have placed twice. You might have placed once off of Bamf, and then you might have done a teleporting strike just to sort of get you there. Teleporting strike is range 3, and with Puff of Smoke, which doesn't cost anything, Nightcrawler can then place within 2 of that character, which then brings him in range for Brimstone Blitz. Hopefully as well, it's done a bit of damage to help charge up that Brimstone Blitz.
Yeah.
So that first one is 7 dice. You're getting hits. Hits happen. It's whether you get that crit or not.
Yeah.
And oftentimes I've got that crit and I've not got that hit, and then that crit explodes into that hit, and it just keeps that train rolling. And if that keeps happening and he places again off the attack and then he does the Brimstone Blitz attack again, it doesn't matter if he's only doing 1 or 2 damage each time. Every time he's adding a dice, and every time you add a dice, you're increasing your likelihood that you will get the trigger off.
Yeah.
You're also increasing the likelihood that you'll do even more damage. And that one time that you don't get the trigger off, that's where Professor X comes in, because he can then use his rerolls to try and force that to happen.
Yeah.
Just to sort of keep it going.
And what's really frustrating about Nightcrawler's attacks is that you can't retreat from them. Fallback doesn't work because he places off them every time. So, yeah, you're right. He's this attrition piece, but also he can pick up objectives. Nightcrawler is clearly a staple. You mentioned you have 2 5 threats.
Correct.
You have Juggernaut and you have Cable. I think I can guess which game plan is which.
Yeah.
Based on your missions, which game plan do you tend to lean into more based on your secures and extracts?
So based on my extracts, I certainly tend to lean more into the objective play, and Juggernaut certainly sees the table more.
Yeah.
When you transfer a power over to him in the first turn, so say Nightcrawler goes, picks up that extract with first class and bounce back, you're thinking, well, Juggernaut doesn't really fit the game plan because he's going to move, push himself. He can't. He's an out of power, but by giving him that 1 power, he doesn't need. It's essentially giving him first class. It's giving him. It means that he can move, push, pick up an extract, and then potentially move back if he wants to, or he can move, then push wherever,
or be aggressive, right?
Or be aggressive. And actually, where I found that he can be especially powerful is when he's being aggressive. So he can move, push, do an 8 dice attack on a model that's gone to pick up one of those central extracts, and even if it's a character that's got a health pool of 5 or 6, with Charles, if you're going late with Juggernaut and you're leaning into, right, I've not got priority, so maybe I'm going to be down on extracts. So Juggernaut, instead of picking up an extract himself, he's going to chase one of their extract holders. And in that game plan, you can go with Nightcrawler, pass a power over to Professor X, go with someone else, pass a power over to Professor X, make sure he's got 3 power on him. So then by the time Juggernaut is doing that 8 dice attack, it's got 3 rerolls behind it. And actually, the chance of you, whether it's getting that push off to push them off a secure with a wild, or even dazing them and just powering Juggernaut himself up so he can then push himself back to where he needs to be again in that turn.
So he can push as many times as he wants, can't he?
Exactly. As long as it costs 3 power every time, so it's not cheap, but he can push as many times as he wants. He also synergizes so well with the leadership because he wants to be doing that push almost every round, but also every time he takes damage, he can spend a power to reduce it by 1. And he does that in my turn, he does that in your turn. And that costs 1 for me to then pass someone else 1. So it's a really, really efficient way to maximize the leadership.
Whereas Cable, on the other hand, he does differently. He similarly, though, has active and reactive, which he uses all the time, but he's a much more aggressive character in the sense that he shoots things. He likes to place himself and double shoot.
Absolutely. Cable, he wants to be dazing a character in his activation. I often find if he's not dazing a character, he's not doing what he needs to do. And he similarly synergizes really, really well with Professor X's leadership. First thing he does in his turn will be to spend 2 power to place. So he starts the round with 2 power. That will then transfer another power to someone else. Do that round 1. Fantastic. That can then help him get within range 3. So he's getting his rerolls, he's getting his attacks, helping him build his own power. He's got his throw, his terrain throw, which is, again, it costs X between 1 and 4. That's great because it means I've only got 1 power left because maybe my attack's whiffed. I've not used a superpower yet. I'm just going to throw this size 1 at you. You can choose that. See, a lot of these characters have got these big throws. They cost 3. They always cost 3. Whereas his is scalable, which leans really well into the leadership because if that's the first superpower or that's the superpower you do that turn, you can choose how efficient you want it to be and how it transfers the power. Also, he's got the telekinetic shield, which he's doing that in other characters' turns, often in your opponent's turns, either to give himself additional dice or to give his friends additional dice. Who often needs additional dice? Professor X often needs additional dice.
Yeah.
But not only is it giving them additional dice, it's triggering the leadership as well. So it helps that power train going. And, he's triggering the leadership. I've got other characters in the roster that are all triggering the leadership. So they're all passing power around each other. And essentially, the difficulty with what I found with Professor X is it's all about sequencing. If you get that sequence right, everyone can have amazing turns. Everyone can do exactly what they want. If you get that sequencing wrong, you can find yourself stuck with unable to do the superpower, which then stops the next superpower happening, which then stops the whole train. So Cable is really, really good at keeping that train going because his power generation is amazing. Usually always able to do his superpowers. And like I said, he's doing them in both his turn and your opponent's.
Yeah, and I think that train is really why, I mean, you're an X-Men guy, you love Professor X, but that train and that skill level required is probably what's kept you with Professor X for so long, is because it's a really satisfying thing when it works to get right.
I call it a symphony. It's like, I feel like I'm there conducting the orchestra when it's all going right.
Yeah.
And it all starts in turn 1. And it can keep going throughout the game. And when it's going well, it can really spiral because you find yourself flooded with power. And you talk to most X-Men players, what do they lack most? Usually it's power. You know, the Storm leadership costs a power to get the hop, and they're often running away and they're not doing attacks. Their attacks are often a bit feeble, so they're not gaining much power from them in a classic X-Men way. Whereas here, actually, that ducking and dodging and using your superpowers to try and stay alive, that's sort of feeding itself to keep going if you get the sequencing right. There's nothing worse than when they attack a character who, say they attack Nightcrawler and he's on 0 power, so he can't put his defenses up, which means then you can't then pass a power over to Rogue, who then suddenly now can't charge. So if she can't charge, she can't then pass a power over to Quicksilver, who can't do his speedster. Whereas if Nightcrawler had just been able to put his defenses up, that whole chain of events happens.
Yeah. I want to ask, you talk about this symphony, and yet you have all of your secures are pay to flips. And I know that X-Men are famously good at pay to flips. They're probably the best pay to flip team. But actually, what you often talk about when you play Professor X is you want to be doing like the Nightcrawler 1-power superpower to get the chain rolling. Why is it that you've decided to bring pay to flips as your kind of all 3 secures?
So I didn't originally like pay to flips with Professor X because they didn't want to be spending their power early game on those pay to flips. You know, the usual reason why X-Men are so good at these pay to flips is because with first class, they can flip a point and pick up an extract in the same turn. They finish the round with 0 power. And obviously that's the last thing I want on my team. You know, I want to be using superpowers. So why do I want to be doing pay to flips? And I ended up bringing the pay to flips back into the team with practice. And it's not because, well, I do have an option to go Storm if I want to play that way, but I really don't want to play that way. I'll mention why she's there shortly. The pay to flips, Professor X's leadership, it becomes much more powerful in rounds 2, 3, and 4 on the pay to flips than it is in round 1. So I don't get the points lead. The same as any other team, the first class is very much being used for the picking up the extracts. It's a Brucey bonus if I can also use it on the pay to flips. You know, those characters that aren't picking up the extracts can then go and flip maybe my home Mutant Madmen or you know, my home sword bases before they then move into position. That's nice, that's a bonus, but it's not there for round 1. Those pay to flips where I've become a lot more powerful is in the later rounds, because often pay to flips can starve your opponent of power, because the way they're going to get points is by spending that, and that turns off their superpowers, whereas my superpowers are turning on my ability to pay to flip.
Sure, yeah.
And I've still got all the usual X-Men tricks in the likes of Beast, who can place, you know, he's a bit of a pay to flip specialist because he can place off his attacks. If he rolls skulls, he's generating more power.
Yeah.
And the Professor X leadership allows him to do all of that and also throw a character off a point, which makes the pay to flip more likely.
Yeah.
Whereas regular X-Men, he's probably having to choose whether he's flipping in those later rounds, whether he's flipping or throwing, unless he gets lucky and rolls those skulls, say. Nightcrawler, similarly, he's placing off his attacks. He can get onto that point. He can, you know, use his then Bamf, allow someone else then to do a pay to flip. He's also great at them because he's getting onto them. Hopefully he's killed them with Brimstone Blitz. He can then flip it. So yeah, they still seem quite powerful.
Yeah, you've convinced me. It's quite interesting because it's the opposite of what most X-Men players do. X-Men like finishing the game round 3 because they've won on points, whereas I guess you are happy with the game being a little more extended.
Yeah.
And because of the nature of your game plan, you can bring certain characters that are slightly more tanky than maybe the conventional X-Men characters would be, because of the help of Cable's shield and Nightcrawler buffing his dice. I want to get on to your splashes, but first, why don't you tell me, when does Storm leadership come along? You've teased us.
I have mentioned it a few times, and actually you've already in this episode said the answer. Storm comes on Spider Portals.
Right.
Professor X's bubble is a range 4 reroll bubble, which is great. You can make that work on B maps. I think I like B maps because my characters want to be going more one-on-ones, and often on a B map you can sort of maybe pivot more to one side, and you've still got like a good sort of, it's like a pseudo E. These don't work like that at all, really.
No.
You sort of want to turn it so you are 2 and 2, but they're so far apart that you
Yeah.
really don't get the most out of Professor X. Yeah, he's still getting his leadership, but he's a 4-threat leader. It's a big threat sink when all he's doing is providing a leadership. And, you know, he's not great at flipping points himself. He's only got 2 dice.
Yeah.
Yes, he's quite mobile, a medium mover, medium base, but yeah, he's not doing so much. Whereas Storm, with the hop and with her energy defense as well, the fact that she can sort of sit on that back D and maybe ping people with her range 4 attacks.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the rest of the team is sort of hopping around. Juggernaut's there. He's got that big base that the other characters will love to storm hop off of to then sort of move around, be a bit more mobile on those D maps. So Storm comes in for that.
Yeah.
And it's also an option if I feel like just a threat doesn't work. And it's, you know, there's particular characters that want to come. Again, you know, you will know this playing Blade and other 4-threat leaders. Sometimes it just gives you a bit more flexibility having a 3-threat leader. If it's a game where I'm not going to be leaning so hard into my superpowers, there aren't going to be many of those situations. It's largely there for spider portals.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think, Storm is renowned for being good on pay to flips generally, but spider portals in particular, I think is a really good X-Men, Storm X-Men crisis. So let's move on to your splashes. So there's one in particular I want to ask about, because you have Quicksilver in that roster, who is a 3-threat long mover, yet there is also an X-Men who is a 3-threat long mover in Kitty Pryde. So why is Quicksilver in and not Kitty Pryde?
Yeah, I alluded to this in our last episode when I mentioned that I was having a bit of a trial with Quicksilver. Yeah. Kitty Pryde was a Shadowcat. She was in the roster previously, as you said, the long mover who's affiliated, so she can benefit from first class. So she can do that midline grab with To Me My X-Men, where she moves short, which allows a long move to get to the middle point, which so she can long move back. She can do all of that. And if you've passed the power over to her, she's got that place within 2. So even if she couldn't do that, she can grab a central point and then place back within 2, which is great for the leadership. So she felt good, and she can also she's like a 3-threat cable in the sense that she can hand extra dice out to herself and to friendlies, not within range 3 but within range 2. So she seemed like really synergistic in that way with Professor X. However, I found that she was a little bit lackluster in other departments of the game, and almost a little bit too easy to play around. Yeah. She would often, once people within, she's got stealth, but once people within range of her, it was too easy to squish her. And she was often in range of them because she wanted to be within range of my other characters to then give them any extra dice that, so I could do the superpower. But it's too easy for them just to sort of go into her. Paying 2 for 2 additional dice on yourself, as many people have said, is often not the best. Unless, maybe it could be backed up with some Professor X rerolls and make it a little bit better. But I just found that she was just a little bit lacking in that regard. Whereas Quicksilver's sort of doing everything that she does, but isn't affiliated. So frustratingly, he can't do the turn 1 pickup and superpower.
Yeah, the first class is a shame.
Yeah, he can't benefit from the first class. Thematically, I'm happy having him there. He's turned up many a times with the X-Men, so that's not a problem for me. But ultimately, a lot of the characters that I was umming and ahhing about, they often will pay to get additional defense dice, or they'll pay for rerolls, etc. He's already got rerolls built in, so he's already got that. He's not paying for them. Maybe he's not synergistic, but he's got them. So he's his defense dice are pretty good with those rerolls. But he does have an active and a reactive superpower. His active superpower, Speedster, I think is excellent. It's if he's not holding an objective token, he can advance long. Yeah. Professor X's leadership, if you pass power over to him turn 1, obviously the first thing he does is that long move. It's like a free long move, because obviously he's not holding anything straight away. Yes, it brings him on 0 power, so we can't pick anything up. But then he's got a range 3 builder, which suddenly he's long moved up into the middle. He can now double tap. Yeah. And yes, it's only 4 dice. You do it twice, though, suddenly you're more likely to then generate that power you need. He's also got a reactive superpower in Can't Catch Me. Yes, it costs 3, so it's a little bit more spenny. But actually, the Professor X leadership is the best way to make sure he always has 3 power on him. And that keeps him alive better than Kitty Pryde ever kept alive, because he can dodge. and it's it's moving him out of the attack range, which might then also move him onto a point which he can secure or flip in his turn and then run away from it.
And sorry, does he have Warcrawler?
He does have Wallcrawler, so he's a long mover with Wallcrawler. So he is just so mobile. He's getting around the board so well. His spender also allows him to move as well. So terrain doesn't bother him because of that. Long moving over terrain is just amazing. And what I've found by giving him that power in turn 1, he's a great option when I don't have priority and I might be going down on extracts. If it's an asset, sadly only if it's an asset, suddenly it makes can I borrow that far more likely to come off. And in every practice game that I brought it, turn 1, he stole an extract because he long moved.
He just does 1 damage.
Just needs to do 1 damage. And quite often that first one might fluff, or he gets the trigger velocity, which allows him to then do another attack onto someone else before he then gets his second action to do an attack. So we've got at least 2 opportunities to gain the power to spend on it. And if he's done the damage, that's 1 of the power. Hopefully he does a second damage to gain the second amount of power. He can then spend to steal that extract.
Yeah, that's nice actually. You have Nightcrawler early, grabs an extract and gets the train rolling, and then later in the round, when your opponent thinks, okay, I'm even, Quicksilver steals. And I guess it kind of balances what you're saying about how X-Men often go up on the pay to flip, but you're actually you're playing the longer game of the pay to flip.
Yep.
And this going up on extracts kind of helps mitigate that kind of slight weakness.
Definitely.
Comparatively early game.
Definitely. And if he's gained the extract from stealing it, he's often much better placed to then run away.
Yeah.
Because if he was to, say, double move and pick something up, he doesn't have the power to run away. So they'll just come to the midline and start punching him. Whereas because he's had an opportunity from his attacks, they're builders. So, if you spike off some of those attacks, all you need to do is start round 2 with 2 power. You pass him another power with another character. He's now got 3 power. It's online. Or you start round 2 with just 1 power phase and a character activation. So it feels a lot safer him going for the steal than it does him just moving up and picking something up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we could talk. I know you could talk, and I love hearing about Professor X all day long. But I think we'll stop there. We don't want to give away all your secrets to your competitors. So we'll pause there. There are 2 lists. I'm very excited to hear about how Professor X goes on. I know he's been a real passion project of yours, and he's now got a display board to kind of match that. So we've gone through some of the details of our roster. We've given our opponents a few little tidbits, things to think about, food for thought. Maybe we're just trying to get in your head and we're actually not going to do any of this.
Yeah, I'm playing Thanos Cabal.
So on that, we've got a week until Mutant Weekender. We've both agonized over our rosters. Curtis, what are your goals? And we're gonna focus on the competitive goals going into the Weekender.
So apart from the Charles Sam event that I went to, I've only taken Professor X to one other event, and I went, I had 2 or 3 games, and I think I, won 2, lost 2, and I just felt like, I just needed that one more game. So for me, I'm just buzzing really to get 7 games in with Professor X and to really prove his mettle. I think there is something in this roster that I think is being slept on, that I think it's really rewarding when you get that sequencing going. And I want to try and win as many games as I can with it and really prove that Professor X is decent. In saying that, my main goal though for the weekend is to win my pod. So I want to come away and say that Professor X is a winner by winning all.
You want a trophy?
Exactly. I want a trophy that was earned by Professor X and his uncanny X-Men. But what that means is, day 1 doesn't really matter. Day 1 is a practice. Day 1 is me. I'm going to try and win every game, but I know there'll be matchups that I come up against. There's going to be some meta pieces that obviously I've personally don't want to put in my roster that I know I'll face, and there'll be mistakes that I will make. So however I do on day 1, I want to go into day 2 and I want to win my pod. I'd love to go 2-2 day 1 and then find myself somewhere in pod 4, pod 5, and then really give my best shot at it. But if I go 1-3 and I end up in or even 0-4 and end up in a lower pod, I'm still going to be absolutely gunning for it to try and win that pod.
That's quite a nice goal, because it basically means that yes, day 1 is important, but you're not going to be miserable at the end of day 1 because you've lost all your games, because actually the main goal is to win your pod. And actually, you could argue that losing all your games makes your objective a little bit easier.
Yeah.
So
I might, it feels quite gamey to just, intentionally lose it. But I want to treat those 4 games as almost like learning. They're my practice before the big day on day 2.
You can always almost make some risks that you maybe wouldn't if you were.
Exactly. This is where, like you say, those characters which I'm umming and ahhing about, they come to the table day 1 to prove it, and to either prove or prove wrong their inclusion, so that I know what best to do day 2 when the games really matter.
So I've just realised I actually forgot to ask you if there are any characters that are waiting in the wings to come in day 2. I'm going to assume not, because you've been working pretty hard at this roster, but are there any characters? Just quickly,
essentially, Quicksilver and Psylocke were relatively late additions for the likes of Shadowcat and Bishop, actually. Bishop was my sort of EMAP specialist.
Yes, of course.
I really enjoyed playing with him. He doesn't synergize so well with Professor X,
sure.
but he's a medium base, medium mover with 4 energy defense, so he sort of worked in that Storm Portals gameplay.
Yeah.
He loves getting extra dice from Cable in defense because of his wilds, etc., doing that reverse pierce.
Yes.
And if you can reroll those as well from Professor X, he likes those. But I've been playing a bit of Apocalypse, Sevens of Apocalypse, and Psylocke is she's a meat grinder. She just absolutely destroys us.
She hits like a truck.
She really does. And with her martial artists, she can be just as effective on EMAP. So she came in. But what that means is my reserve team members are essentially a bunch of affiliated characters who haven't made the cut. And essentially what it means is if day 1 goes so badly and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to go back to my roots to feel good about this. My team needs to be X-Men. They can come in. So yeah, the likes of Bishop and Shadowcat will be in those reserves. And I'll probably bring in my box, not fully yet decided, maybe a few other affiliated characters, maybe Wolverine.
Nice.
Unlikely though, because like you say, I've had a lot of time to plan.
Yeah, because interestingly, your roster, they're in the X-Men world, but they're not. You don't actually have loads and loads of affiliated X-Men. You have quite a lot of unaffiliated models, but they just tend to be brotherhoods.
Yeah, I just still like mutants more than anything else.
Yeah, they're mutants still. Yeah. So you're still winning on theme points, but it's not necessarily. So yeah, maybe some more affiliated characters.
Exactly. But yeah, so they're the reserve members. But like you say, I'm not thinking too hard about that.
Yeah. Are there any other goals you want to mention?
Well, just to try and get as many games in as possible. I'd like to maybe change a few people's minds about Professor X, but ultimately I'm going to need to prove his mettle on the tabletop. So hopefully over those 7 games, I'll be able to get some wins.
It'd be good if you could get maybe double digits in games across the weekend. There's 7 games auto, so maybe the Friday a couple, maybe
1 or 2 on
Saturday
Friday,
1. Yeah. Just try and squeeze them in, because you don't get that many in real life games anymore.
No, we don't. And on the Monday as well, me, my wife, and my little girl, we're flying on very belated honeymoon, and we're going to be out of the country for 2 weeks. So I'll be starved of games. While I'm very excited, of course, for that, but we'll be starved of games for those 2 weeks. So yeah, I'll try and get as many games. So yeah, okay. My goal is to get double digits on games.
Yeah, good.
Right, yeah. Archie, you're off the back of a big win at Bad Moon. So go on, tell me, what are your competitive goals for this event?
So I think on a very basic level, I would like to go positive. I'd like to go 4-3 across the weekend. That is kind of a I like that sounds good. I think actually I'm probably putting a little bit more emphasis on you on day 1. I would like to get into one of the top pods. Top 3 pods would be I think that would be a great achievement for me, because it's going to be a super competitive event, but I also know that my list has legs, and if I play it well, I think that is an achievable goal. So I'd love to get into that top pod, top few. I'd love to get into the top pod, but yeah, top 3 pods would be great. And then day 2, just try and smash the pod and go for gold in whatever pod I end up in. But yeah, I think I'm putting more emphasis on getting into a high pod, being a small fish in a big pond, as it were.
No, I think it's a really good goal for you. Obviously, you're off the back of a win, and beating players like Pat in that win as well sort of should hopefully give you confidence to do that. The best players, day 1 is so important, because the real metal is going to be which pod you finish in, because obviously then you're restricted on day 2 to who you play against. And obviously the big kudos is going to be those players who are competing in that Omega level pod. Even though obviously there are lots of pods and lots of prizes, which is great for sort of mid-table players like myself, For the top players, the way that the event will be ranked overall will be, if you finish 7th in pod 1, you finish 7th for the event overall. So it's the better the pod you're in, the better you guarantee your placement for the event overall. So
Yes.
I completely agree. You after your win, I'd be very upset if you were going for nothing less than trying to win as many games as possible and get into those top pods as possible. I'm going to slightly, everyone says they want to go positive. Archie, I think you can do better than that. I think you can get yourself into one of the top 2 pods.
It's interesting because there's so many players. We are doing a Swiss ranked on day 1, and it's 4 games, so that would be plenty for a normal event. But because there are 80 players, I think there'll be quite a lot of players that are on 3 and 1.
So 4-0, there'll be 5 players.
Yeah.
So that means in the top pod there are going to be 3 players on 3 and 1. However, at the end of the day overall, there's going to be a lot more than 3 players on 3 and 1. So those tiebreakers are going to be critical for whether you finish in the top pod or the second pod.
Exactly. So that will be super interesting to see how that actually plays out, because you might go 3. There'll be people in the top pod that have gone 3 and 1, but I think there probably will be people in the 4th pod potentially even that go 3 and 1.
I've not done the maths past that. Definitely in the pods 2 and 3 there'll be 3 and 1s.
Quite possibly, yeah. So that'll be interesting. So maybe amend the goal slightly. Let's go at least 3 and 1 day 1 to push for that top 3 pod.
Yeah, and you know what? If the tiebreakers go your way, as they did the other weekend, maybe you might just creep into that top pod.
Exactly. So on our kind of goals, we've talked about our goals. So the plan for Cable's Conquests over this time, obviously there might be a little bit of a gap as Curtis goes on his holidays before we record.
And then you're off.
And then I'm off. So we're going to have to squeeze it in somewhere. Maybe we'll get it to you by next Christmas. But we're going to do 2 episodes, one following day 1 and one following day 2. But day 1, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're both going to talk about our games in less detail than we normally do, but we're going to have a wee bit of a competition. And basically, whoever does better on day 1 will then be followed in full Cable's Conquest style on day 2. So we have a little bit of an in-house competition. So not only are we trying to beat out all of the competitors, but we're also trying to do better than each other.
So this is why I can't go 0-4, right? I can't game my overall game plan. Because
exactly.
I want us to be talking about Professor X come episode 3.
Exactly. You haven't had your full Professor X episode, and I've got my Midnight Suns episode out already. So if you're not careful,
exactly,
I'm going to get the double.
Exactly, and I would, if Professor X then went off into the dust, 'cause it's unlikely I'll play him again for a while. I've had a lot of games with him. He needs a rest after this event, and if so, I'm going to be gunning to try and beat you. I want you to win. I want Cable's Conquest to win. So don't get me wrong, but gosh, it would be sweet if I could get more wins than you day 1, so that our pod is all about Professor X and the X-Men. For day 2, that'd be fantastic.
And I'd love it almost if you go 4-0 and I go 3-1. We both creep into the top pod, and then we end up having a Cable's Conquests final. This is the dream scenario. That'd be good. That'd be good. We'd have to do something a bit special. Definitely. If we actually end up playing.
Yeah, you might not hear that till next Christmas because we'd want to do something special for it.
Well, we might not be talking to each other if we're both.
That's true.
If silverware is on the line.
That's true.
That might be the end of it.
It would be. You know what? It would be cool if we did end up in the same pod after day 1, and maybe there was a final or something that. Of us going up against each other, it would show to the listener as well. Who's the better player. I imagine most of our listeners will be like, it's obviously Archie, but you've not seen Professor X in action. You've not seen him do bits, and he's done bits.
Curtis has been hibernating for a while. He's been biding his time, waiting for his moment. I might have peaked too early.
Exactly. Yeah, you've got your wins. You've got your wins now, and. What we're also going to be doing, which is quite exciting, is we want to try and, during the weekend, obviously it's going to be a really special weekend for us, so many players there from not just the UK, but have travelled in from abroad. We want to try and reach out and sort of build our content by interacting more with the players that we play against. Obviously, we talk about the games that we have and we run through them, but we want to also hear from those players, not just the players who we might play against, but the players who will be at the event. So one thing that we will be doing is trying to speak to as many of you as possible. And hopefully, if you're willing, if you let us, maybe doing a small interview. And it'll be very, very small. We just want to, hear who you are, what affiliation you're playing, and maybe your moment of the weekend so far, or, your favorite character in your roster, or, your absolutely most nuts moment on the tabletop so far. just those sorts of questions. And if we can record them, get them on the pod, and you'll be able to hear yourself and come back and listen to the episode and check yourself out as well.
Yeah, so that's a cool thing that you kind of came up with, and I guess we kind of have tried to think about how to do this. And yeah, so it'd be really cool if people are interested in hearing their voice on the pod and giving us a little bit of feedback, just to kind of grow the community, connect the community, because it's going to be a great event. There's so many players coming down for it. So yeah, we want to try and bring the community together and use this platform to do so. So yeah, come find us, come speak to us at the event.
Yeah, we want to hear what you're playing. We want to hear what wacky combinations you've thought of that you want to put on the tabletop. If anything that Archie or myself has done in Cables Conquest has inspired any of your thinking, we want to hear that. If you think we're idiots and we should be doing something completely different, we also want to hear that. So do let us know. We want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So we look forward to seeing you all at the event. I think with that, we'll wrap up. Before we go, Curtis, where can people find you?
So you can find all my painted miniatures as and when they get posted up on my Instagram. That's simple_edge highlights. Or if you want to drop me a message, I'm on a lot of the Discords for MCP as Curtis H. So feel free to just drop me a message, whether it's hobby related or otherwise. How about yourself, Archie? Where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm also on Instagram. I'm Smeagol's Corner on Instagram, hailing back to my Middle-earth days. And I am Archie RC on Discord, and just Archie on the Longshanks if you want to reach out. Yeah, chat, please do. And hopefully we'll see loads of you at the Weekender. I actually should have mentioned I'll be rocking a new jumper that I've got that my wife bought me for Christmas, which is Cables Conquest merch. I'm hoping that Curtis, yours will have arrived by
Fingers
then.
crossed.
I'm not sure. So look out for us at the event. And yeah, please do reach out. We also must shout out Louis, audio whiz, and soon to be video editor for our display board YouTube videos. So please do check out our YouTube channel, which is Cables Conquests. Louis worked hard on that, and he's been pushing us to do these. So it'll be good if we could get some feedback on those.
He'll also be there at the event, won't he? At least on the Saturday, playing Star Wars Shatterpoint.
Yeah.
So there's a small Shatterpoint event running alongside the Mutant Weekender. Mm-hmm. He's such a key figure in the local Shatterpoint community.
Yeah.
So yeah, he'll be there as well. So he'll probably hate us for saying this, but if you do see him, say hi.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you everyone for listening. Thank you, Curtis, for being on the show with me and making it happen. And until next time, keep up the conquest.
The name's Cable. Remember it.